Chapter 3. Awakening. Nakia navigated her way through the dimly lit living quarters, a labyrinthine space that had become a makeshift home for all Drexarian conscripts. The dim lighting cast elongated shadows, creating an eerie atmosphere. She could feel the restless energy of feeding time, an event that reminded her of animals in a zoo. The announcement had come through her audio implant, a subtle reminder of the control exerted over them. She pondered whether the message had been broadcasted aloud or transmitted directly into her mind. As she accidentally bumped into yet another conscript in the poorly lit corridor, Nakia's frustration bubbled over. "Why the hell do they keep it so dark in here?" she exclaimed, her voice echoing slightly. "If they can build this damn spaceship, they should be able to install a few more lights, or at least let us use our tech." She knew the implants were designed to compensate for low light, but the lack of visibility felt like another form of control, a constant reminder of their helplessness. Her outburst attracted a few glances from nearby conscripts, their faces briefly illuminated by the sparse lighting. Some nodded in agreement, while others simply continued on, resigned to the conditions. Nakia realized that her frustration was not unique. It was a shared sentiment among many of the conscripts. They were all grappling with the reality of their situation, far from home and under the command of an alien force. In these dark corridors, Nakia found a sense of solidarity, an unspoken understanding that they were all in this together, trying to navigate the uncertainty of their new lives as soldiers in an interstellar conflict. Nakia's confusion was met with Rook's calm, experienced voice. "Plenty of lights installed. It's their tech, not ours," he said, his figure emerging from the shadows as she bumped into him. "But why? Why not use the tech?" Nakia asked, her voice tinged with both surprise and a growing curiosity, noticing the stark contrast in Rook's demeanor compared to the battlefield. On the field, he was more communicative, but here, in the confines of the ship, he seemed distant, as if conserving his energy for something else. Rook sighed, a sound that seemed to carry years of resignation. "Pup, it's all about control. They limit our movement and make sure we can't turn their tech against them," he explained in a tone that suggested he had repeated these words too many times. Before Nakia could process this, another voice chimed in from the shadows. "Kid, what old Rook here isn't saying clearly enough is, enjoy your time on the battlefield. Once the fighting stops, it's back to this darkness." Startled, Nakia twisted towards the source of the new voice. Her eyes struggled to adjust to the dim light, barely making out the contours of a face that seemed to float in the gloom. The voice sounded young, around her age, but the figure remained an enigma, a mere silhouette in the pervasive darkness. This revelation added a new layer to Nakia's understanding of her situation. The battlefield, with all its dangers and adrenaline, paradoxically became a place of clarity and purpose, starkly contrasting with the oppressive, controlled environment of the ship. The darkness here was more than just a lack of light. It was a symbol of their captivity, a constant reminder of the Drexarians' dominion over them. In this moment, Nakia felt a growing bond with her fellow conscripts, united in their struggle against the unseen chains that bound them. "I'm beginning to see that, though I'm not seeing much at all. What's your name?" Nakia inquired, her voice echoing slightly in the dimly lit space. "Stacy, and I'm straight, just so you know," came the reply, tinged with a hint of humor. Nakia responded quickly, "Oh, I wasn't—" "Wait. What? How did you know?" Stacy interrupted her. "The implants, kid. You'll see. There's little privacy when we're all linked. Here, the connection is weaker, but the longer it's active, the more you adapt to it. That's when many lose their sense of self. Some, like Rook and Jackson, they've had it so long they almost crave the connection. But for now, let's focus on eating." Nakia turned, feeling a mix of violation and intrigue at the thought that everyone here knew so much about her. Yet she was still so disconnected from them. She took a step forward, ready to reluctantly embrace another aspect of her new reality, when suddenly she felt a hand grasp her wrist. But instead of alarm, she felt an odd sense of anticipation. The shadowy figure placed a meal bar in her palm. Nakia remembered receiving her first meal bar under normal lighting conditions. Now she realized they were being conditioned to operate in darkness. Surprisingly, she found herself looking forward to the meal, a stark contrast to her initial difficulty in eating the first bar. "Thank you," she murmured, unsure if anyone was there to hear her gratitude. Nakia stood there, pondering her situation. Had I been standing in line this entire time without realizing it? The realization that her senses and perceptions were adapting to this new environment was both fascinating and unsettling. She was beginning to understand the complex web of control and adaptation that governed life as a Drexarian conscript, a life that was slowly reshaping her identity and understanding of the world. "Follow, pup," Rook said over his shoulder as Nakia took her first bite of the meal bar. "Why do you keep calling me pup?" Nakia asked, a hint of curiosity in her voice. "I like it. Stay alive, and I'll learn your real name," Rook replied, continuing to move forward without glancing back to ensure she was following. "Can I ask where we're going?" Nakia queried, trying to keep up with his pace. "Yes," Rook responded curtly, offering no further explanation. After a few seconds of silence, Nakia's patience wore thin. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice tinged with childlike frustration. "Your spot," Rook answered, as if it were obvious. Nakia exhaled dramatically, rolling her eyes in the dim light. Next, she heard him ask, "Stacy, are you coming too?" Nakia thought she heard a faint snicker in response. "What exactly is my spot?" she asked, her tone a mix of bemusement and exasperation. Stacy, finding humor in Nakia's questions, took a moment to compose herself before answering, "I'm sorry, it's just not many things are funny anymore around here. Your spot refers to sleeping arrangements. We stay close to each other in this compartment. It's funnel-shaped, with a new level every 2 feet. We sleep in the middle level. It's safer, less chance of being chosen for a vacation." Nakia processed this new information, feeling a growing sense of camaraderie with Rook and Stacy. In this alien environment, terms like vacation had taken on ominous meanings, and the concept of sleeping spots was more about survival than comfort. Despite the overwhelming situation, Nakia found a small comfort in knowing she wasn't alone in navigating this new reality. Nakia's observation about the somber tone accompanying mentions of vacation prompted her to voice her confusion. Why does everyone look so downcast when they talk about a vacation? It's like they're headed to detention or something. A heavy silence fell over the group, the weight of her question great. After a few tense seconds, Stacy started to speak, but was abruptly cut off by Rook. "No good comes from that explanation. Just pray you never find out," Rook interjected sternly, rolling onto his side to signal the end of the discussion. Nakia's frustration boiled over. The accumulation of unexplained mysteries, the oppressive environment, and the loss of her former life ignited a fiery outburst. "What? That's it? How can I not have more questions? I'm done with this. Being paralyzed by that damn blue beam was bad enough. I don't even recognize myself anymore. I've become some kind of techno-soldier," she exclaimed, her voice echoing in the stillness. As her outburst subsided, a profound silence enveloped the room, so intense she thought she could hear her own tears. She scanned the faces around her, barely visible in the dim light, their expressions unreadable. "Stacy?" she called out, only to see the woman's face turn away, swallowed by the shadows. "What's happening? Why, oh!" Nakia's words trailed off as her gaze fixed on a startling sight above. There, hanging high above them, was a large bat-like creature, its dark gray face with blood-red eyes locked onto hers, paralyzing her with fear. Her heart hammered in her chest, a desperate rhythm trying to escape the grip of terror. "Where did that come from?" she whispered. "They sleep above us at times," Stacy replied in a hushed tone, just as the creature swooped down with a gust of air. "You hurt my ears, conscript," the creature grumbled, its red eyes glistening. The presence of this alien being, so close and so intimidating, added another layer to the already complex environment of their captive lives. "Nakia, was learning what her fellow conscripts had already, learning the hard way that their new reality was full of unexpected and often frightening elements. Nakia struggled to speak, her words trapped in a maelstrom of fear and confusion. I, she stammered, her thoughts scattering in panic. Rook, recognizing the severity of the situation, intervened with a more assertive tone, reminiscent of his battlefield command. The girl didn't know any better. I'll inform her of the rules. There won't be any future incidents, he said in a firm whisper. Nakia's mind raced with alarm. Shit, 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 the thought repeated like a frantic drumbeat. She noticed Rook's change in demeanor, his voice now carrying the burden of authority and responsibility. In an instant, the dark face disappeared, along with the other conscripts, leaving her enveloped in an oppressive darkness. A sensation of constricting force enveloped her, as if silky leather was tightening around her, immobilizing her completely. Each breath became a laborious struggle against an unseen restraint. Am I moving? She questioned internally, knowing that verbalizing her thoughts was futile. Where am I? How did this happen? Her mind churned with questions, the silence around her stretching into an endless void. She tried to count the seconds to anchor herself in time, 1, 2, 3, 4. But as the numbers grew, the effort seemed increasingly ineffective. In the vast, silent darkness, she began to doubt her own senses. Had she even started counting, or was it just a desperate attempt to cling to some semblance of reality? Nakia's experience in the grip of this alien encounter blurred the lines between reality and her own perception. She was left adrift in a sea of uncertainty, struggling to comprehend the surreal and terrifying new world she had been thrust into. May I request forgiveness for the new conscript, Your Majesty? She shows great potential for service in battle. Rook's voice filtered through the receding darkness, a formal tone lacing his words. As the oppressive darkness lifted, light flooded Nakia's vision, searing her eyes and forcing her to squint against the sudden brightness. Tentatively, she turned to confront the source of her confinement, only to meet the piercing gaze of the blood-red eyes that had haunted her moments before. Now illuminated, she saw the creature in full detail, not just a bat-like face, but a full-bodied entity, with massive wings that had enveloped her in their terrifying embrace. Her vision slowly clearing, Nakia's gaze drifted to Rook. He stood with a respectful poise before beings she presumed were Drexarians, unmasked and formidable. Who is he speaking to? The question echoed in her mind as she braved a look towards the throne. Until that moment, Nakia had believed nothing could surpass the fear she had already endured. That belief shattered as her breath caught in her throat, and her body involuntarily trembled. There, across the room, sat a figure so daunting that the prospect of death seemed merciful by comparison. The creature was a vision of nightmare, a massive Drexarian draped in shadows, seated upon a throne of writhing serpents, their heads not of snakes but akin to crocodiles with stunted, powerful beaks. They swayed hypnotically, one over each shoulder, their presence suggesting a perpetual readiness to strike, their slavering maws a testament to their lethal intent. Nakia's gaze was locked onto the Dark Sovereign. The fear rendered her unable to look away. The Drexarian's presence dominated the room, his throne a grotesque monument to his power. The serpent seemed to respond to his will, a dance of death awaiting his command. In this moment, Nakia realized the true horror of her situation, far beyond the physical confines she had known, a psychological terror that threatened to overwhelm her very being. A whispered prayer escaped Nakia's lips, a reflex from her upbringing. Allah watch over me. It was a quiet plea, born out of a lifelong habit that had once been a source of conflict, and now offered a sliver of comfort amidst the chaos. Her faith had been a point of contention back home, where her love for another woman was a sentence for death, but now it seemed like a distant concern. Her words, barely audible, nevertheless drew the attention of the imposing figure before her. Allah, I am Zahak. Clearly they have neglected to teach you. No god, Be it Allah, Yahweh, Zeus, Vishnu can save you now, Zahak proclaimed, his voice reverberating through the chamber as his serpent companions writhed with increasing fervor above his shoulders. Instinctively, her faith flaring defiantly in the face of fear, Nakia began, "Muhammad teaches us," only to be cut off by Zahak's booming laughter. The room filled with an unsettling amusement, and even as Nakia faltered, unsure of what was unfolding, she noticed Rook's confusion, signaling that this was far from a normal encounter with Zahak. The serpents seemed to share in their master's amusement, their undulations a sinister spectacle. As suddenly as it began, Zahak's laughter ceased. "Muhammad," he said, the name rolling off his tongue with a mixture of nostalgia and contempt. "A name I haven't heard in millennia. The boy I discovered, feral and alone in a cave, whom I shaped in my image. He was a pawn in a grand design to control a planet of warriors. I ruled your people through that fragile boy until his mind could no longer bear my presence. So remember, when you speak of your teachings, you invoke my true name, Zahak." Nakia stood still, her prayer forgotten, as she absorbed the gravity of Zahak's claim. The entity before her was not just any tormentor. He was a being who claimed dominion over histories and faiths, a creature of old and new nightmares. In this moment, Nakia realized the depth of the darkness that surrounded her, a darkness that spanned not just worlds, but also the very essence of belief and history. Tension in the room grew thick as Zahak shifted his formidable gaze back to Rook. Nakia could barely process the bombshell that had been dropped. The implications were overwhelming, and her mind raced with questions that she dared not voice. In this moment, before such an ancient and malevolent entity, she sensed that curiosity could lead to consequences far beyond her understanding. Zahak's voice broke the silence once more. "Now, as for your plea," he began, his eyes lingering on Nakia with a hint of dark amusement. "I find this conscript most entertaining, a rarity indeed. To honor your years of loyalty, I shall grant a choice." As Zahak's declaration echoed through the chamber, the ground before him shifted. Nakia watched, her heart pounding, as a section of the floor opened. Her eyes were wide with apprehension, trying to anticipate what horror might emerge. Beside her, Rook averted his gaze, his familiarity with Zahak's games bringing not relief, but a deeper dread. From the depths below, a platform ascended, bearing a figure that was eerily still, save for the terror that flickered across his features. He was a blond man, clothed in the same uniform as the other conscripts, his body rigid like a mannequin, but his eyes alive with fear. They flitted desperately between Rook and Nakia, pleading silently for some reprieve from his unknown fate. The sight of the man, so starkly afraid yet unable to move, struck a chord within Nakia. It was a chilling reminder of the blue beam that had once paralyzed her, a memory that still haunted her dreams. She realized that Zahak's choice, whatever it might be, was not a reward, but another facet of his cruel dominion, a game played with lives hanging in the balance. The unfolding horror rooted Nakia to the spot, her voice barely more than a whisper as recognition dawned on her. "Jackson," she called out, her tone betraying her shock. The man's eyes, once darting in panic, locked with hers, confirming her fear. It was indeed Jackson, his leg visibly injured, his presence there a grim revelation. As she was nudged forward by her Draxarian guard, Nakia knew resistance was useless, and any defiance would lead to a swift and brutal end. Approaching Jackson, a surge of emotion overtook her, and she embraced him, whispering a heartfelt, "Thank you," for reasons only they could understand. Zahak's booming voice shattered the brief moment of human connection. "Enough! It's feeding time!" His command rendered Nakia motionless, her body going rigid within a blue beam of light as she faced the dark majesty. The serpents, she realized with horror, were an extension of Zahak himself, not separate entities but part of his being, amplifying his terrifying power. As the serpent coils loomed overhead, and Zahak's gaze burned into them, Nakia's heart raced with the fear that they would be devoured. The anticipation of death was almost as torturous as the act itself, and she braced for the end as the serpent's beaks hovered inches from her face, their saliva dripping onto her skin. In a sudden, grotesque display, Zahak tore Jackson's head from his body as effortlessly as one might pick fruit from a tree. "Friend of yours?" he taunted, holding Jackson's head before Nakia, forcing her to witness the extinguishing of life in Jackson's eyes. The serpents struck with precision, their beaks snapping shut and consuming the contents of Jackson's skull. All that remained were the lower features, held in Zahak's clawed hand, still dripping with blood, a macabre trophy displayed before Nakia's horror-stricken face. The brutality of the act, the loss of Jackson, and the monstrous appetite of Zahak combined to form a tableau of nightmare. Nakia, caught amid this horrific scene, found herself grappling with the overwhelming reality of her situation, her own mortality, and the merciless nature of her captors. The terror of the moment was etched into her very soul, a terror that transcended the physical realm and plunged her into an abyss of despair. In a dismissive gesture, Zahak flicked the remnants of Jackson's head away, as if it were nothing more than a piece of refuse, his action devoid of any semblance of reverence for life. He resettled upon his throne with a serpentine grace, his gaze then falling to a figure at his side, a dark-skinned woman in a soiled lab coat, bound to him by a tether that ran from her neck to his waist. Nakia, still frozen in place, was struck with a chilling realization. The woman had been there all along, unseen by her until now, as Jackson's blood trickled down her own face. The woman, Zahak's servant, moved quickly at a mere glance from her master, carrying an object to his feet. Nakia's eyes widened in horror as she recognized it not as a bowl, but as the skull of an alien species unknown to her, repurposed into a macabre vessel. "Which do you admire, conscript, my servant or me? Or is it the prospect of seeing her devoured that captivates you?" Zahak inquired, his voice dripping with malice, noticing Nakia's gaze. Compelled by a fear that the servant might suffer a fate similar to Jackson's, Nakia managed to utter a single word, "No," as Zahak's attention loomed over the servant girl. Zahak seemed almost amused by Nakia's response. "That is fortunate for her. She learns fast," he mused. "My men plucked her from the frozen expanses of your planet not long ago." His attention returned to the servant, who appeared to be singularly focused on washing the blood from his feet with the water contained within the skull, oblivious to the terror unfolding around her. "This bores me now! Take them away!" Zahak commanded with disinterest. In an instant, the world around Nakia went silent and dark. This time, the darkness was a sanctuary, a respite from the monstrous spectacle she had been forced to witness. In the void, she could no longer see Zahak's malevolent stare or the gruesome throne of serpents. For now, she was spared from the twisted reality of her captors, left alone with the echoes of her thoughts and the lingering dread of what might come next.